everyone, and welcome to the Speak Up podcast. If you're here for the first time, we're so glad you found us. And if you've been listening before, thank you for coming back. It really means a lot. Before we begin, we'd love to ask you to subscribe. It's a small click, but it helps this podcast reach more people like you who want to grow and feel confident with English.
Today's topic is all about talking about the past, but not just in a simple way. We'll be exploring how one moment often depends on what had already happened before. That's where the past perfect tense comes alive. And by the end, you'll see how it can make your own stories feel more clear and connected.
When you look back on your life, you realize it's never just one event. There's always something that had shaped it first. That's exactly what this tense shows. It gives meaning to the order of your memories. And once you hear how it works, you'll notice it everywhere in your own thoughts and conversations.
And don't worry, we'll keep it simple and natural, almost like opening a journal together. You'll hear our stories, and you'll start to feel how this tense flows into your own way of speaking. So thank you for being here. Let's step right into the past and see what it reveals.
You know, when I think back to my childhood, I realize how often I had dreamed of things before life took me in another direction. As a kid, I had imagined myself living in so many different worlds, sometimes as an explorer, sometimes as a musician, even as someone who had traveled far away to places I'd only seen in books. Those dreams felt so real at the time, almost like they had already happened. But then, life shifted, and those dreams slowly faded into the background. Looking back, I can see how those early imaginations shaped the way I see the world now, even though they didn't unfold the way I thought they would.
I feel the same. When I was younger, I had learned certain lessons without even realizing how important they were. For example, I had spent so much time helping my family with small things like running errands or listening to my grandparents' stories, and only later did I realize how much wisdom I had been carrying from those moments. At the time, they just felt like everyday tasks. But when I look back now, I can see how they had quietly prepared me for bigger challenges later in life. It's almost like those lessons had been waiting inside me, ready to show their meaning when I truly needed them.
Yeah, it's interesting how those small seeds stay with us. I had thought my childhood dreams were just fantasies. But when I grew older, I noticed how they had shaped my choices in subtle ways. For example, I had dreamed about exploring, and even though I didn't become an explorer in the traditional sense, that spirit stayed with me. It made me curious, open to learning, and willing to take risks. Sometimes I think we don't realize that our younger selves had already planted something in us, something that waits quietly until we're ready to notice it.
That's so true. I had believed that many of the small things I did as a child were unimportant, but later I saw how they had built parts of me I didn't even know existed. I had learned patience, for example, by listening to people talk for hours, and I had learned responsibility by being trusted with even the tiniest tasks. Back then, it didn't feel like learning, it just felt like life. But when I look back, I realize those moments had already written parts of my story before I was even old enough to understand.
And I think that's what makes looking back so powerful. We often say life changes suddenly, but when you really think about it, so many of those changes had already been set in motion years earlier. I had thought certain opportunities came out of nowhere, but in truth, the foundation had already been laid in my past, in the habits, the dreams, and even the struggles of childhood. It makes me feel like nothing is wasted. Even the smallest memory had a role in shaping what came later.
Yes, exactly. And it makes me wonder how many of us carry lessons we don't even realize we had learned long ago. When I reflect, I see that my childhood had already prepared me for moments I didn't see coming. It's humbling, in a way. It reminds me that our past isn't separate from our present. It had been building the whole time, even when we were too young to see it. And when we share these echoes from childhood, we're really just opening the layers of who we've always been.
You know, when I look back, some of the most important changes in my life, didn't just appear suddenly. They had already been prepared by something that had happened earlier, even if I didn't see it at the time. For example, I remember getting a new opportunity that felt completely unexpected, but when I thought about it later, I realized I had been preparing for it all along. I had already learned certain skills, I'd already gone through small struggles, and those things had quietly set me up for that moment. At the time, it felt like chance, but when I look back now, I can see the thread so clearly. That moment had been waiting for me, built on everything that had already come before.
I can feel that too. I had faced so many challenges in school, especially when I was younger. At the time, it just felt exhausting and sometimes even unfair. But those struggles had already shaped me, even before I realized it. Later, when I reached a point where I needed strength, I found it inside me because I had already lived through those earlier difficulties. It's strange. When you're going through a challenge, it just feels like pain or effort. But when you look back, you see how it had been preparing you for something bigger, something you couldn't have faced otherwise. That's where the past perfect almost brings the hidden meaning into focus.
Exactly. And I think that's why some moments feel like turning points. Not because they arrive suddenly, but because they reveal what had already been building inside us. For me, one of those moments was when I moved into a completely new phase of life. People thought I'd just adapted quickly, but the truth is I had already been through so many smaller changes before. I had already learned how to adjust, how to stay calm, how to carry myself when everything felt new. By the time that big shift arrived, I wasn't starting from zero. I had already been prepared, even if I didn't know it at the time.
I know that feeling. When I think about my first real breakthrough, it only happened because I had already gone through the harder parts first. I had failed many times, I had questioned myself, and I had even thought of giving up. But each of those moments had already built a kind of strength I didn't notice back then. So when the breakthrough finally came, I could hold onto it because I had already been made stronger. Without those earlier challenges, I don't think I would have recognized the value of that moment. It's almost like the struggle had been necessary, carving the path before I even reached it.
And that's what amazes me. The way life connects things we don't understand until much later. I had often believed some events were meaningless, but then a turning point would arrive and suddenly it all made sense. I realized I had been walking with those lessons, carrying them without even noticing. The skills, the patience, the resilience, they had all been gathered quietly in the background. When the moment came, I wasn't unprepared. I had already been shaped for it. That's what gives me comfort now. The idea that even today's struggles might already be preparing me for something I can't see yet.
Yes, and I think that's the gift of looking back with this perspective. So often we tell ourselves a story about failure or difficulty, but when we step back, we see that those very struggles had already been preparing us for growth. My own challenges had already created the strength I later needed. My doubts had already given me clarity when the right moment came. And every time I reflect like this, it makes me trust life a little more. Because if the past had already been preparing me before, maybe even now, things I don't understand yet are shaping the turning points still to come.
You know, Priya, sometimes I look back and realize how certain connections were quietly taking shape long before I even noticed. I remember one evening during university, I had walked into a group discussion almost by accident. But what had happened years earlier, my habit of reading late into the night, even when I didn't understand everything, had already prepared me for that moment. When I spoke up, people actually listened, and that gave me confidence I didn't even know I had been carrying. It felt like my earlier loneliness had silently built a bridge toward that connection.
That feels so real, Ryan. I think of the time when I had joined a volunteer group. On the surface, it looked like a random decision. But I realize now that my childhood, where I had watched my parents quietly helping neighbors in small ways, had already shaped me. When I met those people, it felt like I had been guided there. The connections I formed weren't just sudden. They had been waiting for me, shaped by the kindness I had grown up around.
Exactly. And it makes me think of how even casual encounters carry old stories inside them. There was a moment when I bumped into a friend during a bus ride, someone I hadn't seen in years. The conversation flowed so easily, but what made it possible was that we had built trust back in school years before. That earlier foundation had already set the tone. It was like the past had been sitting patiently, waiting to join the present.
I felt something like that too. During one of my toughest times, I reconnected with a classmate I hadn't spoken to in ages. She reached out to me with words that I didn't even know I needed. But the reason her words mattered so deeply was because of the bond we had built quietly, way back in our childhood. The trust had already been there, buried under time, and it returned like it had never left.
And maybe that's what makes connections so powerful. They're not just about the moment they happen, but about everything that had already taken place before. The laughter, the pain, the mistakes, the learning, all of it adds layers. When I think about people who are close to me now, I realize their presence feels strong because my earlier steps had already prepared me to meet them, to recognize them.
Yes, and it reminds me that none of us walk into relationships empty-handed. We all carry pieces of our past, the lessons, the scars, the quiet victories, and they shape how we bond. Every friendship, every connection feels like a thread that had already been woven before we even knew it. And when those threads meet, it feels like life was gently guiding us toward each other all along.
Priya, sometimes I think about how many lessons I had been carrying with me long before I even realized they were lessons. For example, when I was younger, I used to watch my father fix things around the house. At that time, I thought it was just him repairing a chair or tightening a loose screw. But later in life, I understood that he had been teaching me patience, persistence, and problem solving. Those quiet moments had shaped how I deal with challenges even today, without me being aware back then.
I can relate to that so deeply, Ryan. I remember how I had struggled with self-confidence in my teenage years. Every small mistake felt like the end of the world. But when I look back now, I realize those struggles had been preparing me for resilience. Each time I failed or felt embarrassed, I had been learning to stand up again. At the time, it felt heavy, almost unbearable. But today, I can see that those lessons had been silently building me into who I am.
That's so true, Priya. Sometimes the biggest lessons come disguised as ordinary moments or even painful ones. For example, I had been carrying the lesson of empathy without knowing it. When I was a kid, I once teased a classmate without realizing how much it hurt him. Later, when I saw the sadness in his eyes, I carried that memory with me. For years, I didn't even think about it. But as I grew older, I realized I had been shaped by that moment. It had quietly taught me to be kinder, to think before I speak.
Wow, Ryan, I really feel that. For me, one of the quietest lessons had been about letting go. I used to hold on to people and situations thinking if I just tried harder, things would work out. But over time, I had been forced to face situations where holding on wasn't possible. At first, I thought those experiences were just painful losses. But now I see that I had been learning acceptance all along, that sometimes peace comes not from control, but from release.
Yes, and it's amazing how these lessons don't shout at us, they whisper. I had been holding on to the idea that success meant doing things fast, achieving quickly, proving myself. But slowly, through disappointments and delays, I had been learning patience. It wasn't obvious back then. I thought I was just being tested, but now I see those delays had been teaching me that real growth takes time and that slowing down is not a failure. It's part of the journey.
Exactly, Ryan. For me, the most surprising part is how these quiet lessons keep unfolding even now. I realize I had been collecting them in pieces through laughter, through tears, through silence. And now when I sit and reflect, I see how each one had been guiding me in ways I couldn't imagine back then. It feels humbling, almost like life had been holding my hand gently, teaching me all along, even when I thought I was lost.
You know, Priya, as I sit here thinking about all the stories we've shared, I realize how much the past perfect shapes the way we remember. I keep noticing that when I say, I had dreamed, I had hoped, I had tried, it doesn't just tell a memory, it places me back in time, almost like I'm layering the past on top of itself. And honestly, it feels like life is this long chain of events where one thing could never have happened if another hadn't already been waiting there in the shadows. Looking back, I see how those earlier steps prepared me in ways I couldn't have understood back then.
That's so true, Ryan. I feel the same. When I think about my own journey, the moments where I had struggled or had learned something quietly often explain the choices I make today. The past perfect doesn't just remind me of grammar, it reminds me that nothing in my life has stood alone. Each joy, each heartbreak, each challenge I had faced before has been like a stepping stone leading me here. And sometimes when I tell these stories out loud, I realize they sound different because I finally see how they connect.
Yes, exactly. And maybe that's what makes storytelling so powerful. We're not just saying, this happened, we're saying, this had already happened, and that's why this moment matters. It gives depth. It's almost like when you look at a painting. There are the colors you see on the surface, but underneath, the artist had made sketches, had painted layers, had erased lines, and those hidden strokes make the final picture richer. Our lives are painted in the same way. When I remember what I had gone through, I understand who I am today a little better.
I love that image of layers in a painting. It's so real. For me, I think of it like a garden. Every flower that blooms had been planted long before, maybe even forgotten, but it still grew and shaped the beauty of today. Sometimes I look back and realize how much I had carried inside without noticing. The past perfect lets me see those roots, those hidden beginnings, and it makes me wonder, what seeds am I planting now even without knowing it? What moments will I one day look back on and say, that had already prepared me for this?
Exactly, Priya. And that's the part that really gives me peace. Life isn't just random, it's connected. And when we use the past perfect, it's almost like a gentle reminder that nothing is wasted, nothing disappears. Even the mistakes I had made or the times I had felt lost, they're part of the story. They gave shape to what came after. And maybe, as we move forward, it's about carrying that same perspective, knowing that today's struggles will one day be yesterday's lessons.
Yes, and it leaves the story open, doesn't it? We're not finished. Just like you said, life keeps unfolding, and maybe years from now, we'll look back on this very conversation and realize what it had meant to us and what it had prepared us for. That's the beauty of it all. Every listener here has their own timeline, too, events stacked on top of what had already been. And maybe by remembering that, we can all step forward with more patience, more gratitude, and more hope for what's still to come.
You know, as we've been sharing these stories today, I realized how the past perfect isn't just a grammar point. It's a way of seeing life. It reminds us that everything we've done, every small step we've taken, has quietly prepared us for the moments we're living right now. And I want to take a moment to thank you, our listeners, for being here with us. You could have spent your time anywhere, but you chose to spend it with us, and that truly means a lot. We try our best to make your time valuable, and I hope you leave today's episode feeling lighter, more reflective, and maybe even inspired to look at your own story a little differently.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Ryan. Each of us carries these hidden threads, and when we pause to notice them, life feels so much richer. To our wonderful listeners, thank you for letting us be a part of your journey. Your time is precious, and we feel so grateful that you've chosen to share it with us today. We hope the moments we've spent together have been meaningful and that you walk away not just with better English, but also with a sense of connection to your own life story. Remember, life is always unfolding, and your story is still being written. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep reflecting on the beauty of where you've been and where you're going.